So what it meant for me is when I completed my coursework and I began my clinical work in school, cart services weren't really going to work out. I can't imagine a cart operator coming onto a farm in a field with manure and cows and animals and all that goes on in a clinical setting. And so I knew that wouldn't work out. So I made the decision to go without access services for the last year and a half of my program. So I had no accommodation, no interpreters, no cart services, nothing at all. And it was really challenging, specifically to learn surgery without any communication. I would write back and forth, and at the time, I was very lucky because it was when we first began using paper drapes over a surgical site. And so I utilized markers. I was famous for bringing my small whiteboard with me wherever I went. And I was lucky that my classmates were very supportive and they would write information on the whiteboard for me. I think several of them still have carpal tunnel because of that experience of all that they had to write. And they were wonderful. I took advantage of all their helpfulness. But for my first surgery ever, I'm standing there and we've got a paper drape over the animal and there's an opening where the surgical site will be. And all around the opening for where this incision site is on the paper drape is writing in this circular motion. And I would just look and follow the writing of my instructor and my peers and figure out what next step I had to do. And it was an amazing storyboard of a surgery, A to Z. And I made a few mistakes and we all got through it. And that was the experience of it all. Again, I got through it, my clinical work, I graduated, and I was so fortunate because upon graduation, I didn't have a difficult time getting a job. Everyone was open to the idea of a deaf veterinarian. And really, what I needed as an accommodation, the only accommodation I needed, was to work through the phones. Some of you may not remember long ago utilizing TTYs and TRS or text relay service. It was great at the time, but the communication was slow, and the communication between the two people had to be typed. And it was cumbersome and slow. And I was an on-call provider, so I had my pager, which meant that I was tethered to my home all the time. My TTY was at home, so I couldn't go anywhere else because if I left the house, I wouldn't have access. And no one else had TTYs around me, so I stayed home. Surprisingly, most of the clients I worked with were totally okay with it. And, they would explain what they needed to, tell me about the client. Of all the things they could have complained about, they never complained about having to use the relay service to communicate with me. It was amazing. There have been some really nice changes. Now we've got the video relay service and everything is free and it's accessible and I've got mobile access. I can have my phone in the treatment area. I can place a call to anyone from anywhere. And communicating with clients is so different. Back in the days of the TTY, I was reading an output of the text of their conversation, but I had no idea about how they felt. Were they angry? Were they upset? What were they feeling at the time? But now with video relay services, I can see the interpretation of the client's comments. I can catch things a little bit earlier. I can deal with it. I can negotiate the conversation so much better. And it makes my job so much easier as a result. And I've got my cell phone. I can text someone. If they need to reach me, they can simply text me. I can have my phone anywhere in the area where I work, and all of the conversations can happen via text. So it's been an amazing thing to see those changes happen. They've all been great changes, and they make life easier. Honestly, the worst part about my experiences are not being deaf, it's being short. If you can imagine doing surgery on a cow, cows are big. The back end of the cow, where their back is about as tall as I am. And cows don't lay down for surgery, they stand for surgery. So there I am, right? Sometimes, you may not know this, but cows have 4 stomachs. And they have an occasion for one of their stomachs to sort of swing from side to side, and occasionally it gets a little bit hung up in there. And the procedure to fix that is to do a surgical incision on the side, pull that stomach down, stitch it into place, and hold it still. But I'm short. And I'm reaching into a big cow, trying to reach to the opposite end of the cow, and my arm isn't long enough. I've had instructors pull me out saying, you can't do that, you can't touch the cow. And I say, but I have to touch the cow, my arm's only so long, and I've got to get to the other end of the cow to get the stomach. And they pull me out and say, you can't do that, it's not nice, you can't touch the cow that way. You can't put your head on the cow. I said, well, I can't get in the cow without putting my head on the cow because my arm's too short. And there I am trying to reach in the cow and my head's bonking against the side of the cow's body. Poor cow. I think the cow must be wondering, what is happening back there? So really, the worst part of doing my veterinary procedures is working on large animals, being a very short, petite person.
So we were trying to decide what we wanted to talk a little bit about. In general, the public doesn't understand about vet medicine, especially with death. One thing that's always interesting to me is that people say, oh, you're deaf, it must be hard to be a vet. It must be hard. Like, well, sometimes yes, sometimes, but I try to find the positive that is beneficial for me because I'm deaf. I have a positive for it. An example would be that oftentimes I'm communicating with clients that are not happy people. Either they're not happy because their animal's sick and they're concerned, they're worried about it, or they're not happy because they're generally not happy. That happens too, but you have to be able to communicate with them. Sometimes doctors are not that great at eye contact and noticing behavior and body language change. So when I'm speaking with the person, I have to look at them. I don't understand if I don't look at them. So for me to be able to catch their body language, they're starting to get frustrated, they're starting to get upset, or they're starting to cry, I catch it a little bit earlier sometimes than my peers because I'm already looking at them. I'm not looking at a computer or paper or something else. So communication, being able to right away focus on communication, keeping your body open and facing a person is something that they have to train hearing people to do. They actually take a class on it in vet school, how to use your body language appropriately with other people. They do. They video cam and then they give you criticism saying, you didn't do that right, you didn't look at them long enough, you didn't seem serious. All right. For a deaf person, we're already there, we're already looking, we're already, seeing change of expression. We're trying to, we just want to communicate. I don't care how we communicate, I just want to communicate clearly. Okay. The other thing that's positive is I used to do large animal medicine interest. And when you're deaf, you're looking. See your peripheral vision, always open. Saved my neck a few times, all right? When an animal moves suddenly, I was already aware, I was already paying attention that that animal was moving suddenly maybe. Sometimes hearing people focus a little bit more on what they can hear and not focusing on their eye strengths, okay? So same with animals. If I see an animal that's sitting and they seem okay, but to anyone else they're saying they seem okay, but I see their body language getting stiff. I see their lip getting, I know not to kiss that animal. Okay, all right? So being deafness and aware sooner, it's nice. It's a nice skill to have to start with. I didn't have to learn how to look at people. I mean, you wouldn't think it'd be that hard, but apparently it is. They have to teach it.
It's interesting. One thing, when I was in veterinary school, I'm profoundly deaf. I can't hear a thing. I have no residual hearing. And to learn how to listen to heart sounds for an animal was a skill. I had to teach myself to do it with my hands. And like Jenny said, I really use my eyes a lot in my practice. And I had to learn how to watch the respiration rate of the animal. And I try to teach that to interns. They desperately want to get close to the animal and listen to the heart sounds. And they're trying so hard to listen for 10 minutes at a time. And I think, this animal's going to die in the time that you're just trying to get heart sounds. You need to get on it and do the emergency services. I understand their need to want to listen, but I can recognize from watching an animal's respiration rate. 50% of the time I know what's wrong with a cat or a dog just by watching their breathing and watching it and using my eyes and watching carefully. It's a lecture I give every year to the interns I work with, focusing on recognizing an animal's rate of respiration with their eyes and not putting themselves in danger getting close to a distressed animal. It's funny, I went to a conference one time and the lecture was given by an emergency specialist, and the lecture was on the topic of watching the respiration rate of an animal without a stethoscope. People are so used to listening, but if they would just learn to watch. Sometimes it's not safe to get close to an animal. It raises their anxiety level. They're under distress. And so if you watch them, I felt so vindicated as a deaf person that the hearing world had finally caught up to me. They'd been wasting so much time all these years.
I use my hands also to feel if the heart has a funny sound, murmur, you know. Oftentimes you can feel that with your fingers if you're experienced enough to touch. So oftentimes I'll be sitting and the client is talking, telling me their life story, you know, and the cat's life story, and that's great. And I'm listening, paying attention, and my hand is on the heart. I can feel a murmur, like, okay, we have to, you know, investigate this more, find out what's wrong. So, and it's funny because when you get into vet school, I remember I'm thinking, oh, they're not going to trust my hands, they're not going to trust me. And they said, oh, no, Kim doesn't feel anything, so. Yeah. So, you know, really, you know, being deaf in the hearing veterinary world, the majority of them are hearing. If you got through vet school, if you got through that, you know, struggle of getting through and graduating and becoming successful, doesn't matter if you're deaf, it's a part of who you are, you know. It can be a challenge at times, but that's how you face it. It matters. If you're, oh, I'm deaf, oh, it's hard, I need support. No, just, oh, okay, now what? Go ahead.
And I've met very interesting people along the way. Very interesting. One woman, I did surgery on her cat. The cat's tail, it had come off because it was hurt. The tail was dead, and so it had to be cut off, amputated. And she's like, my cat's tail is going to be short. And I'm like, well, yeah, right. We talked about that this morning. And she's like, oh, well, okay, all right. The next day, she told me she wanted to keep the tail to make a necklace.
I think one of my favorite things now is, now that I'm a little bit older and I'm in a routine, is the reaction of people when they come in and I tell them that I'm deaf, and they'll know right away, and they're like, some of the reactions I get are very strange. That's okay. They'll say, oh, okay, I'm a psychologist. And I look at them like, you think this is the psychology of deafness or what? So obviously I can help you. And how they react to the fact that I'm deaf is puzzling. So it's like, all right, I just try to move on. Another reaction was like, she did this. I'm like, I don't know your language. I don't know your language. I don't know what to do. And it's like, that's okay. I know yours. You know, I'll try my language if you want to try. That's okay. But I know yours, so we'll be okay. So the reaction are things that I don't really expect. There's a lot more resistance. But sometimes I just look at people like, I'm not sure if I should laugh. Are you serious? Or let's just get by that and pretend that didn't happen. I do think it's a little bit different for us because they can choose another vet if they want in the practice, but when they come to the emergency services, they're stuck with me. They don't have another choice, and I do the best that I can. You know, I can't please everyone, but I try the best. But it's like, sorry, too bad if you don't like me. You know, you see intern when they graduate. I mean, what are you going to do? You don't want the intern. So have fun. So yeah, they're really stuck with me. They don't have a choice like with Jenny.
It is fun though. It's fun to have, you know, a good community who are used to deafness because of Rochester, and you know, it's no big deal. I'm like, hey, I'm deaf, and they're like, okay, great, you know, whatever.